In this episode, we're going to be talking about something that isn't as positive maybe as some of the other episodes we've talked about. And it's about the idea of, uncertainty and anxiety about your job, and especially that R word, the dreaded R word, redundancy. And if we're honest, redundancy is something that most people, although I do know some people that can't wait to be made redundant. Have you ever worked in anywhere where if there's a whiff of redundancy, some people are so keen, they're like,
Oh
pick
yeah.
me, pick me.
Yeah.
But for many people, the idea of being made redundant, losing your job is hugely anxiety creating. It's something that people are very, very anxious about. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is this rather unpleasant idea of job insecurity and potential for redundancy. And we were talking before we started recording that I think for a lot of people with AI, more and more people are starting to be concerned that they might lose their job, through AI. So if you are one of those people, what we're going to try and do is give you some tips and suggestions on how to reframe redundancy or how to reframe that uncertainty and how to better deal with it, and how to prepare yourself if that actually unfortunately happens to you. And the stat, Scott, that I don't know if you're aware of, but something like 1 in 3, according to the Chartered Institute of Personal Development in the UK quite recently, 1 in 3 UK workers are worried about their job, and they're worried about job insecurity. Does that surprise you? It was that high.
It does. It's that high. Yeah, that's quite a scary figure.
Yeah,
And that means a good percentage of our listeners are currently facing this
I
right now.
think so. Yeah.
So we are going to include tips, techniques, as you said, to cover this, to help with things like your mindset, diversifying your skill set, and actually trying to mitigate the risk if it does happen, if the redundancy does happen, but also increase your chances of keeping the job you're in and actually
Yes.
enjoying the job that you're in as well.
Yeah.
We'll have some practical tips, things like skill mapping, scenario planning,
Yes.
and building emotional resilience that we'll be covering as well. So shall we get cracking?
Yeah, well, I was going to start as I would, being a psychologist, and as a psychologist, I always come from this angle. But I think you're going to give us some sort of agile, practical tips. But from a psychological perspective, I think what we must recognise is that the idea of redundancy or uncertainty drives the stress response in us. Now, different people respond to stress differently. We all have different approaches to uncertainty. But for many of us, that uncertainty triggers that fight or flight response in our bodies, that sort of adrenaline, cortisol, and that response is completely natural. You can't stop that response happening. You can deal with it and manage it as we'll talk about. But one of the most the biggest impact on people is that stress that's being caused by the uncertainty. So I think the most important thing for people to realize that if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling stressed, that's completely normal. You'd be a bit odd, a bit strange if you didn't feel stressed and worried and concerned about this potential for redundancies and losing your job. And I think what can happen, and this is a sort of ironic problem, is that when people start to fear that they're going to be made redundant, if they fear they're going to lose their job, they tend to turn up more often. They tend to stay longer in the job. They want to show that they're the person that shouldn't be made redundant. And you get this thing called presenteeism, where people will go to every meeting they can. They'll respond to every email they can, and they become overworked. They can become even more stressed because they want to show that they are very valuable and they should be kept. Or the opposite can happen, where if you think you're going to be made redundant, you sort of throw your hands in the air and you give up. So the most important thing here is that if you are in a position where you think your job is going to be made redundant, or there's going to be job changes, recognize that stress, recognize the impact, the cognitive impact. Have you experienced redundancy? I think you've had that yourself, haven't you? Do you mind sharing how that affected you psychologically or emotionally?
Yeah, I always describe it as being accidentally made redundant. I won't go into detail, but it was totally unexpected. And yeah, for me, it was a big hit to my identity because I'd been in the job for 20 years. And, you say to people, what do you do? That's the first thing you meet somebody. What do you do? It's like, well,
Yes.
I do this. This is my job. So a lot of people, as we know, tie their job into their personal identity. So it's no wonder people are fearful of
Yes.
being made redundant or their work changing. That potentially feels like their identity is going to change or be taken
Yes.
away. And that was a struggle for me, actually, to deal with. It took a good few months to kind of overcome that. There was a bit of grieving going on as well, the loss. And then I kind of evolved out and realized that I wasn't defined by that job.
Yes.
And I think that's a key thing to take away from that. If you are, if it comes from out of the blue, it can really hit hard.
Yeah, and I threw that at you, Scott. Thanks for sharing that. My own personal experience, I've not personally been made redundant, but my father was made redundant twice. And I remember, and this is something, again, people who are listening to this, you touched upon identity. My dad lost his job out of the blue the first time round. And he was quite a positive guy, he was quite sort of upbeat and sort of positive. And he got another job within a few weeks, really. But then he was made redundant again within about 6 months. And it was the second time around that really knocked his confidence, because it was very much like typical male, but also for many people in the workplace now, male or female, is his job was him. He was his job was him. It was very much his identity. So when he lost his job the second time round, he really struggled to get a second job. And I remember the emotional impact on him, but also, which, we need to flag up, the emotional impact on our family. There was not just the pure loss of income, but it was the stress and the anxiety when we saw that dad was in a bad place. So yeah, this whole thing about your job being, as you mentioned, being your identity, when you lose your job, as you said, it can feel like you're losing part of yourself. Who are you? What status do you have? What are you for? Did you have any sort of struggles that way? Did that sort of, is that how you felt? I mean, how did you sort of, you talked about getting out the other side, but was there any tips or techniques you could offer people to deal with that emotional stress?
I think for me personally, because it generally was like collateral damage. It was an accident. It wasn't intended. That helped me a bit with my self-esteem. There was some very senior people in the organization apologized to me, saying we just didn't realize this was, whatever they did in the organization was going to have a knock-on effect in your role. So that helped a bit, because actually, if you look at the definition, I've just pulled it up now, the definition of redundancy is unnecessary or not needed.
Yes.
Superfluous. So, if you're defining a person by that, you can see how that's really going to hit home. I think if it had been intentional, I probably would have struggled a bit more.
Right.
And if I was giving advice to myself in that position, I would be saying things like, don't let this define your identity.
Yeah.
And it's cliched, but see it as an opportunity.
Yes.
You hear people say maybe it gives you the nudge that you needed, and it certainly did for me.
Yeah.
I was quite comfortable in that role after 20 years. And, we're going to cover some things today around how to reduce the risk of struggling when if and when it happens.
Yeah.
Actually diversifying your skills, things like that actually give you an opportunity. And we're going to give people tools and techniques today to help get ahead of that, get upstream of that if it ever happens, which will reduce some of that worry.
Indeed. And I think you made a really good point there. I think getting ahead of it is really important. And if anybody's listening to this, how do you perceive your job? Is it very much your identity? Do you, like you said, if you went to a party, barbecue, and people said, tell me about you, would you then say, I'm an accountant, I'm a software developer? Is it so tied up into your identity that if you are at risk of losing that job, that is definitely going to have an impact on you? So yeah, I think this is really important, getting ahead of this, because the one thing we can predict in life is uncertainty. Change is inevitable. It's going to happen to us at some point, that we're going to have some sort of dramatic change. But what you pointed out there was, it's that lack of control. If you decide to leave a job, then emotionally you can cope with it. But if somebody imposes that change on you, particularly like with my dad and like you, it comes out of the blue, it has a huge impact on you. So yeah, thinking about your identity, building support networks. We had a supportive family for my father. My father, had us as a family. But I think if you've got supportive networks, you've got friends, you've got colleagues at work, having that social support can make a huge difference as well. I think leaders and managers have a responsibility to reassure people, okay, if redundancies are down the track, sometimes there's a sort of we can't tell people yet because all the details haven't been sorted out. But if redundancies aren't coming down the track because profits are low, we need to do some restructuring. Telling people ahead of time, getting people ready for the change that's coming can also reduce that anxiety. So I think leaders have responsibility as well to be as transparent as they can be with their team so that they reduce that anxiety. So we talked about the psychological impact, talked about the stress. Are there any sort of tools, techniques from a sort of agile approach, using your agile mindset that would help people deal with this uncertainty, you think, Scott?
I always like to think of agility as seeing opportunities in change and seeing change as an opportunity and not a threat. And that can be quite a difficult mindset to get into because I think we are hardwired to see change as a threat.
Yeah.
But actually, the traditional way of thinking is very rigid and saying, well, this is my role, this is what I do, and if I'm asked to deviate from that, then I will struggle. Actually, if we can broaden our horizons a bit and maybe as an individual start to take an interest in other areas of the business or work with other team members to try and diversify our skills, and there might be something else that you might be more interested in. And actually, the more broad a skill set you can offer, certainly AI could be one example. So do some personal research into AI. There's loads of free videos online on YouTube and free courses where you might just want to understand that a bit more. The more you build up a bit of a portfolio or a suite of skills beyond maybe what you've been used to, the more valuable you will be to your employer and a potential future employer. But also, it's good for you, actually, because we get benefit from learning. And, you have to have a growth mindset, I think, to do this.
Yeah.
And to be able to think about that in that way. But I think expect change is a given. And actually, how can you be prepared for that? And part of that could also be identifying any gaps in your knowledge or experience where you think, actually, I'm a bit weaker in this area. I could do some more research in this. It will just help you build some confidence and help you build some resilience when that change happens or that change comes.
So really what we're talking about, and I think in this idea, is that as human beings, we sort of only expect the good times, or we only hope for the good times. And to sort of reduce the impact of redundancy, reduce the impact of uncertainty, you should expect the difficult times. You should expect the changes and the problems and the issues. And we should do more to prepare for them. And I think what you're saying here is if you can cross-train, if you can get involved in other teams, you can get involved in other projects, you're going to be better prepared for that change. Am I sort of misunderstanding what you're saying now? Is that?
No, you got it right. I think it's linked to not defining yourself by that job title and actually thinking about yourself as offering a collection of capabilities, of skills that could be applicable to different industries, could be applicable to different jobs.
Yes.
And not just define yourself by that job description, because as I've said on previous episodes, just face it, how often are we actually doing what our job description says we are these days?
Oh, yeah.
And actually just having that mindset, flexibility, creativity. And yeah, it is a growth mindset and we need to develop that, I think, some people. But it's about just being prepared as best you can. Now, you don't know if and when these changes are going to come, but better to be prepared and have done something towards that than bury your head in the sand and hope that it won't happen to you.
Yeah, yeah. Life is uncertain, life is unpredictable, and you need to prepare for that unpredictability, but we act as if things aren't going to change. I think it's called the permanence illusion, and I don't know about you, but if you look at any stage of your life, if you could look backwards in your life, at any point you felt, well, this is how my life is, but then you look back now and think, well, it was going to change. When you see any photos of yourself at any point in life, you can say, you don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Have you ever done that? There's a picture of you somewhere as a younger person, and you know what's going to happen in the next year, 2 years, whatever. And maybe you'd wish you could go back and tell your previous self. So yeah, and I guarantee you, my life, your life, something's going to happen in the future that we have no idea what's going to happen. Hopefully it's all good stuff, but it's also going to be some negative stuff. So if we had an attitude as people that, yeah, I'm ready for this, I can deal with that uncertainty, because I'm expecting uncertainty. I'm expecting change, good or bad. I can deal with it. So it is a mindset. It's a growth mindset is what we're talking about.
So I think in terms of this bit, in terms of a next practical step that people can take is to create a bit of a backlog in terms of their areas for personal growth.
Yeah.
And actually pick a range of items, do a bit of a skills audit, things that interest you, things where you like to learn something new, or things that have been quite useful in terms of where you think the market is going. Put them into a list, prioritize them, break them down into small chunks and say, this Friday after work or on my lunch break. Oh, no, we're trying to encourage people to take breaks in the last episode. After work, watch a 20-minute video on AI, an AI overview, for example, so you can start to get some understanding. Tick that one off. Then a few days later, do the next thing on the list. So bringing some agility into breaking down some tasks that you can do to start to broaden your skill set. I think that'd be really powerful.
Yeah, there was a Harvard Business Review that found that if employees felt that they were more employable, they were less likely, they suffered less anxiety about redundancy. So I think what you're suggesting there is a really great idea, is that if you can, there may be no sign of redundancies coming, or even if there's a sense of redundancy coming or risk to your job, is start taking proactive steps now to become more employable. That may be more employable within your existing organization. So if there's a reorg, they've noticed that you're picking up these skills, you've taken new courses, or God forbid you are made redundant, then you're more likely to get a job because you've done all this extra work. So yeah, making yourself more employable, I guess.
And I don't think there's any harm in dusting off that CV and getting it up to date. Even if you aren't intending on leaving and you aren't expecting a redundancy, just going through that process will be a refresher for you. And it gives you a head start. If something does come out of the blue, at least you're not scrabbling around in a panic. You've got a bit of a head start with that. But it also links into what we're saying is do a bit of a skills audit and say, actually, what would look good on my CV that's missing that I actually have some capacity to look at now whilst I'm in a good place?
So you mentioned backlog. You're talking about like an agile backlog. Any tools that you would use for that? Any software tools or?
Yeah, so you can use tools like Trello is a common one, or just a simple to-do list in your phone if that's easy for you. Just something you can move things up and down the list, add things, check them off, just easily build in a list of to-dos.
Yeah.
Don't want to confuse people with terms. Backlog is a term that's used in Agile, but it's just basically a prioritized list of tasks.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think if you could think about yourself as a valuable asset, how do you increase yourself as a valuable asset rather than I'm in this job is me. You are a human being with huge potential. How else can you enhance that potential and value proposition, if you like? See yourself as almost like a product. How can you increase your value to your either existing customer, i.e. your existing organization, or future customers, which could be in future employers? What about things like, and this again, we talked about taking breaks and, having downtime, but side hustles and creating side incomes. Have you any thoughts on that? Because that can also act as a sort of anxiety buffer, can't it? If you've got sort of extra income coming in. Hustle.
I have, I was running my own business for all legitimate and declared through my previous employer for a while, which actually gave me a good head start when the redundancy did come, because then I've already got a company set up. So I will just roll into giving that my full-time attention, which helped a lot. I was literally reading an article on the BBC website a few hours ago about people who are making £5,000 a month on TikTok, sharing all their tips on beauty treatments and stuff. So again, these are people who followed a passion and they're doing that as a side hustle, but it's then overtaken their day job, or they've been able to pay off their debt. So I was reading about one particular thing. So the technology these days, obviously it's fiercely competitive now because everyone's going to be, or lots of people are going to be trying to do it. But there, if you've got a smartphone, that's pretty much all you need these days to start to look at different side hustles. And there's loads of inspiration out there to try and do, Google or search, ask ChatGPT or another AI. Give me some suggestions based on these interests that I have on what I could do as a side hustle, and it will give you some things for you to try.
I think a side hustle, as you said, if it's a side hustle that is going to, take you in a brand new career direction, fantastic. something you can do without burning out. That could also give you that sort of sense of safety. We'll probably do an episode on things like side hustles and how you do them. I think we also do need to emphasize that some jobs, it's a big no-no. You can't do a side hustle because of conflict of interest. So if you are going to do something like a side hustle, it's all got to be above board, legit, and we've got to think about the tax man and paying your VAT and so on. But if you can do things around your existing job that allow you to feel that if things go south, if I do lose my job, I have a plan. And I think, again, what we're trying to suggest here is at some point in the future, things will go in a direction that you don't want them to be. So prepare for that. It's what's known as a pre-mortem. I think we've talked about this in previous episodes, is when you've got a project and if you see your career as a project, you plan forward in a positive way, what you want to have happen that would be a good thing. You then turn it upside down and go, what would be the worst case scenario? What would happen if in a year's time I did lose my job? And being prepared for that gives you that sense of control. And this is where, what we're touching upon here from a psychological perspective, the most important thing here is that sense of control.
So I think a lack of control is what can make things so scary, and redundancy have such a damaging impact on people. So what we're trying to do is try and develop that mindset, as I've said, of starting to be prepared, starting to expect change as a given, and think change is potentially good. It's not always bad. So, and if it is bad, I'll get through it. I've got resilience, I've got skills. There's plenty of other opportunities out there for you. So trying to build in that, broaden your skills, try and get that flexibility to get some feeling of control back.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into leaders. We haven't touched much yet on what leaders can do to support their teams.
Yeah.
I think transparency from leaders is important as well. So things like skilling your team up, sharing knowledge, letting them know that you're potentially in the same boat if there's some uncertainty going around the organization. Have you got any tips from the leadership perspective, Andrew, on that?
No, it's interesting.
Control?
Yeah. No, it's interesting you say that. I think that, control, as we've talked about all the way through this, is so important. It's what's called self-determination theory. The more sense of autonomy and control that we have, the happier we are as individuals. But you make an interesting point that sometimes leaders in teams, they may be under threat of redundancy themselves. An entire section of the business might be going. It might not be redundancies. It might be that, your business is being sold to a competitor, or some venture capital companies coming in and buying up the business. So that there's lots of uncertainty for the workforce, but also the leaders and managers. So yeah, we have to be careful that we're not too hard on, and sometimes I feel that we're too hard on leaders and managers here. But yeah, if you're a good leader, if you are a good manager, as a default, you're training your people to deal with uncertainty. You're cross-training them, you're helping them to be flexible, you're upskilling them, you're helping them with that growth mindset. So in a way, if you're a good leader and a good manager, when and if, and I should say when, change happens, they should be better prepared anyway, shouldn't they? If you're doing your job as a leader, your team, those individuals should be better prepared, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think leaders have a responsibility to do things like, as we said, cross-training, so encourage sharing skills across team members. So get team members working together as a partnership for a while, swapping roles if they can, getting more involved in what each other's doing, so removing that siloed approach.
That's right.
But also mapping the career of the team, actually thinking what does their future look like as well as your own. So reviewing your own skills as a leader, your own interests, but also encouraging the team to do that themselves.
Absolutely.
Looking at market trends, where's the industry going, trying to get a handle on that. And maybe even role-playing some redundancy interviews with team members if that's going to happen. Yeah. So again, giving your team members some preparation before that happens, doing some role-playing interviews with them. And just trying to support them for that change that is inevitable, and trying to build that team culture of change is a given. So what are we going to do about it? We can bury our hands in the sand, as I said, or we can move forward positively and deal with whatever comes at us. I'd rather be in a team that's got that attitude than one that's scared and just running away from the problem. Let's face it head on. If things don't work out, that's okay. We can go with our heads held high that we did our best. And actually along the way, we've picked up the skills and knowledge to move into whatever the next chapter brings for us.
Yeah. Final thoughts for me, really, just got to thank. I think it's really good what you're saying there. I think it's about building up that own personal mental resilience. We'll cover this in a different episode. We've touched upon it in previous episodes, emotional intelligence, but things like journaling, meditation, mindfulness, having hobbies and interests outside of work, having that support, whether it's at home, family, friends, that's also really important. I've got a good book recommendation that's just come to me. It's a book called Designing Your Life by Burnett and Evans. Designing Your Life is a really good book on what they call career prototyping. So check that book out. We'll probably put the notes, a link to that in the notes. And as you've said, and I think we've both been trying to say all the way through, uncertainty is a given. And if you have that redundancy, if you are going to be made redundant, you're losing your job, almost always it's an opening of a door to something better. And it's an opportunity. And resilience is about bouncing back from that and bouncing forwards. So yeah, that's a message I would leave people with.
Yeah, likewise. I look back and think I'm glad that happened, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have had the learning and the experience
That's
I've had
right.
since then. I've significantly broadened my range, the people that I work with, and yeah, so it's not always a bad thing.
Thank you for listening to the Work Unravelled podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next one.
If you'd like Andrew or me to help you or your business, whether it is for team productivity, leadership coaching, or communication skills, our website addresses are in the show notes. Thanks, and until the next time.